and happy Friday. Welcome into Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I am Sam Springer, and as always, I'm joined by Tony Hollinsworth. Tony, how are we? It's Friday.
It's Friday. It's a great day. Can I get a GG from you?
Why?
Because you know what GG stands for, right?
Uh-huh.
It's not just go. It's not just good game. It's
Mm-hmm.
go green
Mm-hmm.
because they're the outright Big Ten champs.
Yeah, we have an outright Big Ten champion in the men's basketball conference. The Michigan State Spartans win the Big Ten outright. They got a share with the Michigan loss the other night that guaranteed them a share as long as they won at least one of their remaining two. They end up beating Iowa in Iowa City 91-84. Tony, they were behind a good portion of the game and had to fight their way back into it to get the win in Iowa City.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they were down even at one point. It was double digit. Yeah, Iowa had a 14-point lead on Michigan State at one point. It was 13-27 Iowa. And yeah, they were even down at the half with Iowa leading by 7, and then Michigan State storms back 61 points to end up putting the game away. And I will say, I think much to kind of what we've talked about the last couple episodes, how does Michigan State have that defined leader on the team that they can go to? It might be Jace Richardson, the freshman out of Colorado, because he has been a stud for them almost all season. And with this win last night, he had 22 points. He was 7-13 field goals and 6-9 out of the free throws. That's about as good as you can ask, to be 100% honest with you.
Yeah, the Spartans have finally gotten their the one that stands out, I guess. Richardson's been around all year, and he's played constantly all year, but he's finally starting to come into his own where he's kind of being looked at as the one to be the go-to guy in certain situations. And 22 points in a game that it was hotly contested for a good portion of the way. About halfway through the second half is when Michigan State kind of finally got the lead and was slowly ahead and just kept Iowa at arm's length. Then after that, Tony, on the other side with the Hawkeyes, they are now in danger. They've got to win at Nebraska on Sunday that they play.
Sunday at 12:30.
They've got to win that, or they will be the third team out and will not go to Indianapolis to play in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, and it kind of sucks too, because both of these teams are coming off of losing streaks. Nebraska's lost 4 in a row. Iowa's lost 3, and as it at least stands right now on Friday morning, the ESPN predictor is actually giving Nebraska a 70% chance of winning, but that's primarily due to it being in Lincoln at the Pinnacle Bank Arena. So it is possible. I think a lot of it, all honesty, right now is just who wants it more to potentially go out there and compete. And like we talked about last week, I still have a lot of questions about this Iowa team as a whole. Once the McCaffreys left, I feel like Iowa has kind of been searching for an identity ever since. Now, I feel like with Nebraska on the other end, not just with I always forget his name, the kid that was an absolute sensation for Nebraska the last 3 years,
Keisei
Tominaga. I feel like with him, that kind of helped show that Nebraska basketball was at least on the up and up. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, are they going to run through the Big Ten? By no means, but they are definitely one of those. They're going to be right about in the middle of the pack, and depending on the night, can compete with just about anybody. And I feel like, to me, I would trust Nebraska more than I would Iowa at this current moment, just based off of about the last probably 2 to 3 years of how each program has kind of gone with post losing their big star.
Well, let's think about this, Tony. is I had his newest bracketology comes out on Fridays, but I haven't had a chance to see it. But Mike DeCourcy on Tuesday
Mm-hmm.
has Nebraska in one of the opening round games to where in Dayton. So the play-in rounds,
Mm-hmm.
um, he has them there.
Yeah.
So if Nebraska, let's say he feels strong enough, if Nebraska loses against Iowa, does not make it to the Big Ten tournament, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know how the tiebreakers work. There right now there are for 5 teams at seven wins.
Mm-hmm.
Iowa beats Nebraska. That puts a 6th team with at least 7 wins, and of course Rutgers, Northwestern, Minnesota, or USC could end up with 8 wins depending on how they shake out in their finale.
All right.
But it could be a team that is in,
Mm-hmm.
according to bracketologists, not making it to their conference tournament.
I mean, let's be realistic though. I mean that it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there's nothing that says you have to be. To me, the conference tournament just gives you more of a chance of if you are potentially on the outside looking in,
Mm-hmm.
of hey, if we can run the gauntlet and at least win the conference, our chances increase. And now I don't know how much it affects it overall, but let's say it is Nebraska and they get into the and let's say they happen to make it into the Big Ten tournament as one of the last spots, and let's say they were one of the teams that were out. Let's say they make it to like third place in the Big Ten and they beat maybe a couple upset teams that they shouldn't have beat. Maybe that helps them get into the bracket again. Maybe as a low seed, but maybe that helps them get in because okay, well they made a pretty deep run in their conference. They made a couple upsets that they shouldn't have. Let's see what they can do as far as putting them in. So I mean, we've seen crazier things happen. That's the beauty of March Madness, and that's the beauty of college basketball as a whole. You can be not the sexiest or greatest looking team, but all it takes is one night, and hey, we got the win, and we can move forward.
I'm gonna go on a flyer and say that I think probably if Nebraska ends up missing the Big Ten tournament, they're not going to get an at-large bid to the NCAA just simply because they're already on that verge of being one of the first 4 out
Yeah.
because they're in one of those opening round games.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like one of the last 4 in. If they lose again
Mm-hmm.
and miss the tournament, I'm betting they don't end up as an NCAA team because right now they're at 17-13. They
Yeah.
if they were to lose, they'd be 17-14. That's not a good at large bid.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And as it stands right now, the
resume.
last 4 in, at least in the main tournament, is Ohio State, Arkansas, Nebraska, and Boise State. The first 4 out: Oklahoma, Xavier, North Carolina, and Texas.
And see those vary on what bracketologist you use too because
Yeah.
I know Mike Corsi has Oklahoma in
Mm-hmm.
compared to he actually has Nebraska and Oklahoma pairing up against one another.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those. I mean, and maybe we're wrong, and maybe Nebraska needs that win against Iowa, and then maybe one game against or in the Big Ten tournament. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Uh, you know what? I guess what's perplexing to me is Iowa's on the verge of being knocked out of the Big Ten tournament without even getting to Indianapolis. That
Yeah.
and you mentioned the McCaffreys, but you're also you talk about the uh, oh shoot, the twins that were there. Not Martin, but they uh, they were just there a couple of years back, and they ended up winning the Big Ten tournament not too long ago, and it just it Fran McCaffrey is a good coach. He's very passionate. He's very
Mm-hmm.
good, but it would just be kind of stunning to me that Iowa doesn't make it.
Yeah. Well, and especially just historically, I mean, you look at Iowa, and Now, do you think that's kind of the benefit and the downfall of having an expanded conference and it now getting to where it's so close that you're going to have 3 teams out now because okay, somebody has to be the loser because you brought 4 new teams in. Do you feel that might be one of the bad sides now is that you're going to have realistic? I don't know if I would necessarily call Iowa a true blue blood basketball program, but at least in the Big Ten, they're historically a pretty decent basketball program.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to be potentially sitting out, the first year of a massively expanded conference, them and Penn State both being one of the, quote unquote original Big Ten members prior to the expansion, being on the outside looking in.
I've never been hugely greatly in favor of the expanding out to 18 teams, but I will tell you that the one thing it does, and you being in Indiana, as well, when it comes to basketball and football in the high school realms, everybody makes the tournament.
Yeah.
So while it is important to do as well as possible, if you don't, or if you slip up a few times, you're still making the tournament so you can regroup and get back into it. Whereas in Ohio now, not everybody makes it. You've got to score, you got to get enough points in the rankings and rank high enough in the top 16 of your region in order to make the tournament. I like that part of it for the fact that now you don't have everybody at the bottom going, well, we'll just hold on until the tournament.
Right.
Now, that does take away a little bit. I don't know if you remember, it was probably 10 or 12 years now ago when Illinois was the last team, or last in the Big Ten. They were, it might have even been before there were 14 teams. So they came in as the last seed. And I believe it was the 11 seed they came in. And they ran through 2 championship Sunday and had a lot of bubble teams sweating because had they won, they were stealing one of those at large bids away from the bubble teams because who they were playing was, and I think it was Michigan State, was going to make the tournament anyway.
Right.
So if they didn't get the automatic bid, they were taking an at large bid, and those. But now what you get is you get those games in the regular season that actually matter now.
Right.
Even though they're I mean, I guess it just depends. Has your team given up and decided they're done? Or are they wanting to try to fight to get to Indy because you never know what you can catch in a bottle once you get to it?
And I guess it would, this kind of is almost a I'm not going to say a dumb question, but also kind of a weird one because at least for some of these scenarios, it's already happening. Say for example, you take the bottom 4 teams. So looking as it just stands right now, I know we have a tie between 4 teams that are all 7-12. No, 5 teams, sorry, that are all 7-12. But at least how the standings are, Nebraska's at the bottom of those. So you have Nebraska, Iowa, Penn State, and Washington. What would your thoughts be for, say, between those 4 teams, either just doing a random shuffle between the last 4 and whoever wins those 2, they can get the last 2 spots potentially in? Is essentially one more shot.
You're playing a lot of variables with not a lot of time. You know what I mean? Because depending on who makes it into those last 4, well, right now, Penn State and Washington, they're going to go in to it, but then Iowa could end up there, Nebraska, USC, there's so many teams that you're waiting until Sunday, and then you've got to hurry up and play those games in order to get them ready for Wednesday, which is when the start of the tournament. I think it kind of works out now, as long as you're not doing what the SEC did for the women's tournament and the top seed with I can't remember who it was, South Carolina and Texas.
Yeah,
the top seed went to the winner of a coin flip.
Oh wow! I mean, I will say though, and this isn't even just in college basketball. I've even seen that done in the professional level even in the NFL. I don't know if you remember, if you saw, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago in the draft, it was, I think, the Raiders and the 49ers had, like, through all of the, like, super intricate rules as far as tiebreakers, schedule breakers, everything like that. It legitimately came down to, okay, whoever wins this coin flip is going to be the 9th pick, and whoever wins this coin flip is going to be the 10th pick, and just go from there.
That's a little bit more close, but honestly, the coin flip for South Carolina and Texas, at least they're both in.
Yeah.
But we get to the point where all the different tiebreakers and things like that, if worse comes to worse, they play Monday the very next day. Fly them all to Dayton and play that one game or fly them to Indy and let them play that Monday to try to get that tiebreaker done. But I'm guessing there are enough tiebreakers that they're gonna be able to find some way of figuring that out. And at the top, we talked about this before we went on the air, and let's see, where are we at on time? Why don't we go ahead and take our break for the audio podcast? We'll talk about the top side of the Big Ten and some tiebreakers, and then talk a little bit more about the Spartans and their championship and what that means for Tom Izzo's legacy. But we'll go ahead and take a break for the audio podcast. We'll be right back. You're listening to Big Talk on the Believe and Lounge Sports Network. All right, we are back. Tony, we were talking about the tiebreakers at the bottom and how they figure out who makes it to Indianapolis. Let's talk about the top real quick of the Big Ten, because we have a big quagmire of teams at we have a group of 3 teams at 6 losses, but we also have now the Michigan Wolverines with 1 game remaining, sitting at 14-5. So it is conceivable, if Michigan loses to Michigan State on Sunday and everybody else holds serve, we could have 4 teams tied for second, which means there is a team that's going to tie for second place in the Big Ten that only gets 1 day or a single bye because they finished 5th.
Yeah. And so I was thinking about this when you mentioned it about the SEC and the women's side and how they narrowed it down to the coin flip. Here would be my other proposal, as far as, and I know the big thing would be, well, it's in conference, it's different. At what point, when you're looking at this, if you're the commissioner or whoever you are as far as overseeing it and making the decision, at what point do you also take the overall record of a team into play too?
I don't know that you do, just simply because of the disparity of how each team schedules. I mean, if you look at that group of 4, let's say, Purdue's going to have the better schedule.
Right.
Maybe not best overall record, but they're going to have the toughest schedule. And maybe I don't even know this, but let's say Wisconsin ranks in, and I guess I could look at
I could tell you their schedule real quick.
The net rankings right now. Wisconsin's at 14, Purdue's at 15. Okay. But that also takes into consideration wins, losses. That doesn't necessarily mean the strength of schedule, but the net is different. But Michigan and Wisconsin. Michigan's 28 in the net.
Right.
And you're basing it simply on just overall one-loss record. I don't think, because at least in the conference, you have every opponent's a common opponent.
Right. Well, and don't get me wrong, I get that completely. But again, I would almost look at it kind of the same way as we did with, how we break down football. And I know everything is graded on a different curve. Don't get me wrong, but to a point too, that would almost be something that I would look at of, okay, what's your overall record? Not dismissing, to your point, Purdue had a significantly tougher schedule than, say, Michigan did. So should they necessarily be punished for that? By no means. But at kind of the end of the day, when when we were talking about, even in the college football playoffs, again, I know it's different. You just have to control what you can control as far as winning games. And I think for the instance, like you said, even if it's down to a coin flip, you're both in regardless. It's just kind of who gets the benefit of what. And I think no matter what, you're always going to have that person that gets the short end of the stick. Really, no matter exactly, and no matter what you do, that's going to happen, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast. You're not going to be able to please everybody, unfortunately. But I don't know, that's one thing that I kind of look at, and again, is somebody going to be upset about it? 110%. But I look at it, I'm like, I guess for me, it's like that's kind of the lazy man's way out of who had the better record.
Well, I'm looking at the top end where we have the three tied for third: Wisconsin, Maryland, Purdue. Let's take into consideration, we don't know this is going to happen, but let's say Michigan stays ahead of these guys. There's that three-way. As long as Purdue beats Illinois tonight, and if Maryland and Wisconsin both win their finale as well, that would leave the three teams in a tie for third place in the Big Ten.
Right.
And they go to tiebreakers then, head-to-heads. Well, Wisconsin beat Maryland. Purdue beat – Maryland beat Wisconsin. Wisconsin beat Purdue, and Purdue beat Maryland. So they all have a tiebreaker over one another.
Right.
Now, where it gets a little – it's a little more in-depth and it's a little more confusing. They start at the top of the Big Ten then after that,
right,
and work your way down on how each team played against that team. None of the three teams beat Michigan State.
Right.
None of them did. So then you go to the next team, which would be Michigan. Well, Purdue and Maryland both beat Michigan. Wisconsin did not. So that would eliminate Wisconsin from the 3 seed. And that would give Purdue the 3 seed simply because they beat Maryland and they beat Michigan when Wisconsin didn't beat Michigan, even though they beat Purdue head-to-head. So that would be how it would work out. It gets a little bit more muckier if one of those three teams loses, or even worse, Michigan loses and all three of those other teams tie, and then you've got a whole plethora of new scenarios as to where I don't know if they jump to the team below that quagmire, which would be UCLA, maybe Oregon. I don't know how that works.
I was going to say, so that would be kind of one of the other interesting things too. Well, I guess not as much when I look at their schedule. I was going to say, let's, for devil's advocate and just to add more chaos into it, because why not? Let's say hypothetically Maryland, Wisconsin, and Purdue all three lose, right? So then now you've got a 4-way tie, and say UCLA wins against USC. Now you've got all four teams at 13-7, or 13-7. UCLA, beat Wisconsin. No, they lost to.
They beat Wisconsin. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, they did. For whatever reason it pulled up. It pulled up Iowa's schedule. Like, no, wrong schedule.
Wrong team.
Yeah, wrong team. They beat Wisconsin, but they lost to Maryland and they lost to Purdue. So it would just be interesting.
It would be a different quagmire of, oh goodness, what just happened.
But UCLA would have the benefit of, they could say we have a win against Michigan State, and they have a loss against Michigan, but they do have a win against Michigan State, which holds a lot because only 3 teams were able to beat Michigan State, and both of them were out in Los Angeles for whatever reason.
Well, and then the last time Michigan State lost was against IU at the Breslin, and they haven't lost since. 6 in a row has gotten them to the point where they are 16-3, and the Big Ten champions outright. Tom Izzo, Tony, you and I were talking before we took the air. Tom Izzo has now won Big Ten championships in 4 different decades.
Yep. And it was funny, too, because I was trying to figure out the math, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. I was born the same year that he took over at Michigan State, and that math isn't math. I'm like, wait, yes, it is. Never mind. Yeah, just ignore that.
You've been alive for 4 decades. You're just not 4 decades old.
Isn't that crazy to think?
Yeah.
Again, how does that math? You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the whole like weather thing that bugs the snot out of me. Like, oh yeah, the temperature is 35. The real feel is 20.
Yeah.
So the
chill.
temperature should be 20.
No, that's what it feels like.
How does the thermometer measure it? Because the thermometer may be like it's 20 degrees, fam. Sucks to suck.
No, what that does is it's just temperature, of the air itself with no movement, and then you add the wind into it, and you're like, oh, it's a little chillier.
I don't like it. Still makes no sense. Don't like it.
But what do you think this does? Does this do anything more to assist Tom Izzo in his legacy? I mean, he's already the winningest coach in Big Ten history, in Big Ten games.
Yeah.
He has a national championship, multiple Final Fours, and he has now won Big Ten titles in 4 different decades. Does this do anything more for his legacy, or does it just add to it?
I think it adds to it. I don't think we really see a true change or at least addition to his legacy as far as, I would almost argue, like more respect until he wins or at least makes another appearance in a national title game. Because to me, I think that is primarily what has held him back as far as when we were talking about, overall as brain fart. As we were talking, early on in the season when, they were looking at the preseason rankings of, UCLA is supposed to be a heavy favorite. IU, Purdue, Michigan State was again, like just barely in the top 5. And much like we talked about, he breaks, Bobby Knight's record, all-time winningest Big Ten coach. He's now, including this season, he's won 11 Big Ten regular season championships. And again, he hasn't won a title since 2000, but it's still a national championship, and he's one of the few active coaches in college basketball that can say that. I think if he can make a deep run and at least get to a national title, if not win another one, that will drastically change his legacy. As far as right now with it, I think it just adds to it, and I think it might just more of add to, he's a really good coach. Maybe some people might argue that he's a great coach, but again, to me, it depends on what they evaluate as far as success and as far as winning goes. How many national titles did he compete for? Okay, he went to one and won one. That's great, but didn't really do much after that and hasn't been to one in 25 years.
Well, he's been in the national championship game a couple of other times since he's won, but yeah, he made it in years that there was a dominant team coming in. I know he lost to North Carolina, and I forget there was one other. I think that they made it, but the team they were playing was a very the year they got beat by North Carolina was when the Final Four and championship game was in Detroit last. Yeah. So I know that was one of the last times that he made it. But yeah, I get what you're saying. But it'll be interesting to see where they go tournament wise, what their draw looks like, because I could see them being in the Final Four this year because they've got a team that is pretty well rounded, and they don't necessarily have a standout to where you shut them down, you lose. You shut the whole team down. Shut the team down,
right?
But we've talked about them as a whole there, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Tony, that brings us to the end of this Friday edition of Big Talk. Why don't you let people know where they can find us?
You can find us on Facebook at Big Talk. That's B1G Talk. You can also find us on TikToks, Instagram, and X, all at B1G_Talk. You can find us twice a week on the All Sports All Plays network that you can get on any app store, whether it's Android, Apple, or whatever you have in between. You can catch us at least twice a week on the All Sports All Plays network. Usually you're going to catch us on Mondays and Fridays. Sometimes we have some technical difficulties or whatnot. That may or may not change, but you should catch us twice a week. And you would best believe that Sam will upload the podcast wherever you like to get your podcast from, whatever your personal savvy is, Apple, Spotify, whatever. And you can also catch us on the Lounge Sports Network, which is umbrellaed under the Lounge Media Group.
All right. Well, that does it all for this week on Big Talk. We'll be back Monday with a Big Ten tournament to look at and evaluate and see what we kind of think about going on. But until then, thank you so much for Tony Hollinsworth. I'm Sam Springer. We'll see you on